A giant ram covered in flames suddenly appeared at the edge of the forest. Everyone watched in shock as a group of animals burst out from the trees. The students on the school bus were amazed and curious. Austin tried to grab his phone to record, but Blake snatched it and threw it out the window. Furious, Austin wanted to get off the bus to retrieve it, but as soon as he stepped outside, the animals began charging toward them. Hey everyone, it's Nacho. Welcome back to another movie recap. The other students panicked and rushed out of the bus, trying to escape. One student, Everett, had been hiding inside to stay safe, but the fire spread quickly, forcing him to leave. As soon as Everett stepped out, Austin ran over, yelling, "Get back inside, there's something out there." Terrified, Everett wanted to run, but the animals seemed to have gone mad and were attacking people. In the thick smoke, Everett spotted strange creatures that scared him so much he collapsed on the ground, overwhelmed by fear. Frightened him so much that he collapsed to the ground due to his anxiety disorder. At this moment, an out-of-control vehicle headed straight towards Everett. Fortunately, Blake was alert and managed to save him just in time. However, in that brief moment, Everett's shoulder had already sustained a significant injury. Blake kept urging him to run, but just as Blake got up, Everett noticed that something seemed to have bitten her around her waist. Despite this, Everett couldn't worry about anything else and chose to run. After reaching the other side of the forest, Everett realized that all of this was caused by the forest fire here. Blake was somewhat of a primitive person, as she didn't have a phone, an email, or any electronic devices. The only way to contact Everett was to find her in person. Blake then returned home, but since her home was in the disaster area, her father Roberto was planning to take her and her brother Danny to safety. While packing at home, Blake noticed the injury on her waist. Oddly enough, even though there was a sizable wound on her waist, Blake didn't feel any pain. Seeing that the wound wasn't bleeding and didn't hurt, Blake didn't pay much attention and continued packing her belongings. However, Blake didn't know that this wound would change her life forever. Meanwhile, Everett had been taken back to the hospital by the rescue team. When Everett woke up, he suddenly felt something unusual on the bed next to him. Curious, he pulled back the curtain to see what was going on. To his surprise, he found a giant ram lying on the bed beside him. Just as Everett was feeling bewildered, a doctor appeared and interrupted his hallucination. The doctor told Everett that his wound was not serious and that he only needed a few days of rest before he could be discharged. But as soon as the doctor left, the phone next to Everett's bed rang. Seeing that no one came to pay attention, he simply went up to pick up the phone himself. Hello? Get out of the hospital. Who is this? Leave the hospital now. Grab your things and go. What? Why? It's going to find you. You can't move as easily in daylight. You are bitten. It has to find you before the next full moon. What does it want? To kill you. For the full moon. Everett panicked when he heard this. At this moment, his parents also arrived at the hospital to see him. But at the same time, Everett suddenly felt a sharp pain in his wound, and then his arms seemed to emit a strange red glow, causing him to faint in the next second. On the other side, Blake's father had already set off in the car. For some unknown reason, Blake, who had never experienced car sickness, suddenly felt a wave of dizziness. Then she also seemed to have hallucinations. Shortly after, the family of 3 arrived at a motel to stay temporarily, but just as they settled down, Danny pointed out that Blake's skin was changing. Feeling astonished, Blake immediately went to the mirror to see what was happening. To her surprise, she found that her previously acne-scarred face had become incredibly smooth. As Blake wondered if she was seeing things, a sharp pain from the wound on her waist interrupted her observation. Blake fell to the ground in pain. However, the pain didn't last long. When Blake stood up again, the mirror had astonishingly turned into a TV screen. On the screen was Everett, the boy she had saved. At the same time, Everett in the mirror turned his head and seemed to see Blake. Realizing something was wrong with herself, Blake decided not to rest in the motel but to go out and find out what was happening to her body. Meanwhile, on the other side of the city, a girl named Luna hurried into a bar, looking for her twin brother, Harlan. Luna was there to find her brother because of the forest fire. Their father, Tarrant, was a forest ranger for that forest, and he had gone missing after the fire started. Luna believed their father might be trapped in the forest by the fire. She wanted to find her brother to help her search for their father because they had some extraordinary abilities.
They found his truck.
Not him. Following the instructions from the phone call, Everett quietly sneaked out of the hospital when the doctor left. Meanwhile, Blake also decided to return home to find out what was going on, but as she ran, she didn't notice that her speed had surpassed Usain Bolt's and that she was even more enduring than him. Blake soon returned home. To her surprise, she encountered Everett there. It turned out that Everett had come looking for Blake because he saw her. Since Blake had no contact information, Everett had to find her at her house. But Blake still didn't know what was going on. With no other choice, they went into the house together to investigate, but they still couldn't find anything useful. Seeing this, Everett revealed his injured shoulder to Blake, but as soon as he took off his shirt, Everett realized he now had an 8-pack of abs. This was strange because he had never had abs before. However, Blake wasn't surprised at all, as she had experienced a drastic improvement in her skin after her injury. While they were discussing their respective changes, a werewolf suddenly appeared outside the house. The werewolf attacked them without hesitation. Everett and Blake tried desperately to escape, but the werewolf didn't give them any chance. With the way out blocked and their lives hanging by a thread, Everett's anxiety flared up again. Meanwhile, deep in the forest, a masked man was stumbling through the fire, facing the surrounding flames. The man realized his chances of escaping were slim, so he took out a pre-recorded voice recorder and left a message for his children, Luna and Harlan. He spoke about Luna's uniqueness and mentioned that they would be able to find others like them. After saying all this, Garrett still wanted to make one last attempt to escape, so, after putting away the voice recorder, he continued to flee along the stream. Everett and Blake are now safe. Blake felt she needed to check on her family's safety, so she said goodbye to Everett. Just as Blake left, Everett received a call from an unknown number. The caller introduced herself as Kristen, an investigator with the fire department. She called Everett because they had found some unusual evidence at the edge of the forest. They suspected the forest fire was an act of arson. They believed the arsonist might be a minor and even suspected that the arsonist was on the school bus with Everett.
The arsonist I'm looking for might have been sitting right next to you, watching the fire from the windows, watching people burn to death.
But just as Everett finished listening and put down the phone, he started to feel a headache coming on. At the same time, Blake experienced the same symptoms on her way home. Suddenly, they both stood still with their eyes turning white. These symptoms also appeared in Luna and her brother while they were searching for their father. As the symptoms subsided, they all began running in the same direction, as if they were being summoned. They eventually met in a clearing. Strangely, as soon as the four of them met, their eyes began to glow yellow.
Yeah, I see it.
Your eyes are blinking.
So are yours?
What never happens, because we're all here. Despite the strangeness of it all, Luna and her brother were not surprised. However, they didn't show it. At that moment, Blake seemed to see something terrifying again and ran off first. Seeing this, Everett chased after her. Luna and her brother followed closely behind. However, they hadn't run far before Blake collided with a firefighter who was working on the rescue. Seeing miners in the fire zone, the firefighter immediately decided to take them home. Thus, they were all forced to return home. Back at the motel, Blake intended to check her injured waist, but when she lifted her shirt, she found that her injured waist no longer had any trace of the wound. Moreover, her facial skin had become increasingly flawless. Just as she was about to admire her skin, she suddenly saw a fanged figure in the mirror. But this was only the beginning. Thinking it was just a hallucination, Blake returned to her room and received a voicemail.
You're not safe.
Meanwhile, Luna and her brother were also sent back to their home. Since their father was the missing forest ranger, the firefighters explained the fire situation on a map and pointed out the area where their father might be. After the firefighters left, they began discussing Everett and Blake. Luna thought they might be like them. However, Harlan disagreed. He believed that Everett and Blake were just bitten and that their bodies were undergoing uncontrollable changes. He thought they might not be like them, and could even be enemies. Back at home, Everett wanted to go to bed, but no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't sleep. He's as alert as he was during the day. Blake experienced the same symptoms. When they finally woke up, an entire day had passed. While sleeping, they had subconsciously blocked their room doors. After waking up, Everett was informed that the police were at his house to question him about the forest fire. Among them was the investigator, Kristen, but Everett claimed he knew nothing, because Everett refused to mention anything about his classmates or what happened on the school bus. The police placed him under house arrest. At dusk, one of Everett's classmates named Connor came to his house to study. While they were talking, Connor mentioned that he seemed to have been bitten by either a coyote or a lion that day. Everett panicked instantly upon hearing this, thinking Connor might be turning into someone like him. He quickly asked Connor to show him the wound. However, it seemed Connor's wound was indeed just a coyote bite. Seeing that Connor's wound wasn't healing rapidly like his own, Everett felt relieved, but just to be safe, he told Connor to call him if anything unusual happened. Meanwhile, Blake, who had noticed her newfound speed comparable to Bolt's, decided to test how fast she really was. After some testing with Danny, they didn't notice anything unusual. As Blake lay on the ground resting, Kristen suddenly showed up. Connor was back in the hospital to have his cast changed due to a broken bone, but just as the doctor was getting him an injection, he suddenly felt a sharp pain in his arm that spread all over his body. It transferred. After Kristen left, Everett secretly sneaked out to find Blake, saying he sensed something was wrong. With the full moon approaching, Everett thought it might be a challenging time for them and came to discuss a plan with Blake. Luna also felt this sense of foreboding, but unlike the others, she noticed some movement outside her house. As Luna approached the door to get a better look, a white horse suddenly burst through the door. Connor, suspected of having a drug allergy, was given a sedative at the hospital, which restored him to normal, but the sedative didn't last long, and Connor woke up again. Upon waking, Connor received a call from an unknown number. The caller, much like the one who warned Everett, urged Connor to run, saying something would track him by scent and if he didn't run, he'd be dead. Panicked, Connor followed the caller's advice and prepared to sneak out of the hospital. At the same time, Everett and Blake concluded through their discussion that they might actually be turning into werewolves, just like in the myths. Just then, Everett received a call from Connor. Connor said he felt something was tracking him.
What's the coyote?
I know.
What?
I know. It's trying to find me. Hearing this, Everett immediately headed to the hospital with Blake. In the hospital, Connor saw the silhouette of a werewolf outside the door, but with his immobility, he was quickly spotted by the werewolf. At this moment, Luna and her brother also received a call from a hospital and arrived there. Firefighters had just found their father barely alive at the edge of the forest, so they called Luna and her brother to come and take care of him. Meanwhile, Everett and Blake had reached the hospital, but they were still too late because Connor was already in a dire situation. Connor tried to escape through a broken fence but got his cast caught in the wire mesh. Hearing the eerie sounds around him, Connor grabbed a nearby rock in desperation. He needed to smash the cast to have any chance of escaping. However, it was already too late. The police found Luna and her brother, and just like with Everett, they wanted to understand more about the forest fire. Everett, following the clues from Connor's call, reached the broken fence, but there was no sign of Connor, only the shattered pieces of his cast. Just then, Kristen appeared, bringing Blake with her. Blake was stunned by what he saw in front of him because Everett was being pinned against the wall by a werewolf. Seeing the gaping maw that could bite off his head, Everett panicked too, but in the next second, another classmate saved him. Just 2.5 days ago, Everett and Blake were just ordinary high school students, but an eerie forest fire turned them into werewolves. A detective named Kristen also noticed their transformation. Additionally, since the fire department now suspects that a group of miners set the forest fire, Everett, Blake, and the Luna siblings were all taken to the police station for investigation. Originally, the fire had nothing to do with them. Everett planned to bluff his way through, but an unexpected incident occurred during the interrogation. While Everett was being questioned by Kristen, their conversation was overheard by Harlan, who has sharp hearing. In the next room, Harlan originally just wanted to make a casual remark but didn't expect that Everett would hear his muttering. Harlan was very curious about this because Everett's hearing is no different from an ordinary person's, so how did he manage to hear his whispers? But just as Harlan raised this question, Blake and Luna in the other two rooms also said they heard his voice. However, their behavior now appeared to be talking to themselves in the eyes of outsiders, because they weren't hearing words, they were sharing their brain consciousness. In other words, their voices directly appeared in each other's minds. All of this happened because they were gathered together. As long as wolves gather, all their senses can qualitatively leap. The four werewolves were no exception. For Everett, who already suffers from anxiety and lacks brain power, Luna and the others decided to use this advantage to teach him how to cope with the interrogation. But just as they were about to finish Kristen's interrogation, Harlan was targeted by another police officer, Trent. Trent resented Harlan and the others because the forest fire incident prevented Everett and Blake, unaware of the Luna siblings' whereabouts, were about to go outside to see what was happening, but then, unexpectedly, they received that mysterious call again. The caller warned them not to go outside because the moon was about to reach its peak, and they would be safe if they could endure that moment. But clearly, Everett was disobedient. After the mysterious person hung up, he and Blake stepped outside. As soon as they were outside, they froze, because the werewolves were already there. After the werewolf leaves, Everett is puzzled as to why it didn't kill him. years. On the other side, at the police station, Austin was brought in for questioning. Austin didn't hide anything. He said that when he got out of the car to pick up his phone that day, he saw something eerie in the black mist. It was large, with deep black fur, about 7 feet tall, with fangs and claws. It turns out that Kristen was also suspecting a monster, as these were exactly the description she had drawn from other students' mouths. However, Austin didn't intend to say much more and angrily left the police station. Kristen didn't try to stop Austin because she had already gotten what she wanted. Then Kristen arrived at the fence where Connor went missing. Looking at the bandages on the wire, Kristen lay on the ground, trying to find clues by mimicking Connor's position. But just as she lay down, she suddenly heard a noise. When she got up, she found that the fire-covered ram had come here, and it had huge claw marks on its body. Meanwhile, Garrett sent Everett and Blake back home. Before they left, Luna knew Blake didn't have a phone, so she wrote her number on Blake's arm with a semi-permanent pen. On the way home, Garrett told them to continue going to school as usual. For now, they should pretend nothing had happened and leave everything to him. But as soon as Everett got back to school, Austin found him. Austin said he was seriously affected by the incident and hoped to get Everett's help. However, Everett had promised Garrett not to say anything, so he brushed off Austin with a vague excuse. Then it was time for their exam. Just as they were writing, something unexpected happened. It seemed Everett's anxiety kicked in again, his hand trembling uncontrollably as he held his pen. This symptom appeared in Blake as well.
What's wrong with you?
I'm just having anxiety. Before they could say anything, the Luna siblings came over. It was clear they were affected too. This was all because the four of them had gathered together, triggering At that moment, yes, you didn't scream. You howled. On the other side of the city, on a rotten building, a man's body was being dragged upwards by something. The man was then taken inside the building and thrown somewhere. A werewolf crouches on the roof, watching the couple below on their date, but to his surprise, the couple starts kissing right in front of him. Seeing this, the werewolf became enraged. That's right, just yesterday, Luna and the others gathered again because of Blake's howling, but it's also because the werewolf took Danny this time that Everett finally understands why the werewolf doesn't harm them, because now, they have all become werewolves. Although they aren't as fierce and bloodthirsty as that werewolf, they are now part of the wolf pack, so the werewolf is actually protecting them. The werewolf took Danny because Danny, who has autism, hit Blake, and the same goes for Trent, who pinned Harlan against the wall earlier. The werewolf considers them his kin, so everything that happened before was to protect them. However, as they were discussing this, Everett received another mysterious unknown call, but now that they know the werewolf's secret, Everett decides not to answer. Yet, as time passes, both Harlan and Luna receive the same mysterious call. Reluctantly, realizing they can't avoid it, Everett finally presses the answer button, took to flight. And on the silent plains is howling in his vain attempts to speak. He raves and rages at his greedy jaws, desireth their accustomed slaughter, turn against the sheep, still eager for their blood. The bizarre call leaves everyone bewildered. Fortunately, Luna, who is well read, says it's the story of Lycaon written by a Roman poet. after failing to capture the werewolf, they returned to the mansion. However, when Sheriff Jason asked them what they had seen, both Kristen and Garrett claimed they saw a large black bear, so they left the scene. Meanwhile, Garrett told Luna and the others to go home. But now, Harlan and Cyrus were nowhere to be found. When Everett returned home, his father, David, was waiting for him. David said that Everett hadn't taken his anxiety medication for several days, and he was there tonight to ensure he took it. In a creepy tone, David forced Everett to take the medication. Everett, having no choice, gray wolf, making its eyes glow, claws grow, muscles bulge, and it stood up on two legs, looking human. Only Malcolm managed to escape. After hearing reluctantly, Everett and the others returned home. Given the current situation, it seemed that the werewolf who attacked the firefighting team back then was likely Harlan and Luna's biological mother. It was trying to protect Harlan and Luna. It was also due to the forest fire that Luna and her brother were transferred to the forest under Garrett's care. Then, when the mother wolf left to return to the burning forest, Garrett appeared and took Harlan and Luna back home. He then raised them for 16 years. They began to suspect that the mysterious caller might be the mastermind behind everything. His goal might be to lure up the werewolf and then have Everett and Blake bitten, but the question remained, what was his ultimate aim? Just then, they noticed the lights in the stable were on. They hurried over to see what was happening. When they arrived, they saw Garrett. It turned out that while they were at the hospital, Garrett had found Cyrus hiding there. Since Cyrus was the prime suspect in the forest arson case, Garrett was persuading him to turn himself in. Seeing his good friend being taken away, Harlan instantly became furious and punched his Everett saw a figure in the mirror with its back to him, and the figure moved with his actions. Everett also noticed movement behind him, and when he turned around, he saw Baron again. Seeing everything calm down again, Everett curiously went forward to check the situation. When he got downstairs, he discovered that the front door of his house had mysteriously opened on its own. Then Baron suddenly charged at him from outside like a madman. Everett was so scared that he hid behind the cabinet. At this point, Baron transformed back into a normal person, muttering something about Baron couldn't open the door, so he looked for another way in. When Baron looked down, he saw Austin running away, so he chased after him without hesitation. But Baron didn't know that the person under the clothes was now Blake. With her speed surpassing even Bolt's, Blake was the perfect choice to lure Baron into the freezer. After a long chase, Blake finally led Baron into the freezer. Now came the crucial part: how to get out. None of them were a match for Baron, so Everett tried calling out taking care of Danny, brought him to Everett's house. When Danny saw Baron, he was too scared to approach because he knew Baron was the werewolf who had captured him in the parking garage. Everett doubted this, saying that if it was the transformed Baron who captured him, how did Danny recognize that the werewolf was Baron? At this moment, Blake suddenly remembered Danny saying he had seen Kristen in the garage too. Blake quickly went to Danny to confirm this. Danny confirmed it, saying Kristen had even shaken his hand. Upon hearing this, Everett also recalled that Kristen had appeared and shaken his hand shortly after he had Kristen had to continue dealing with Malcolm, and as she turned around, she happened to run into Garrett, who was supporting Baron, but Garrett hadn't put down his gun. Seeing this, Kristen decided to come clean, revealing that she was the mother of the Luna siblings and that Baron was their brother. Kristen explained that Luna and Harlan each had unique abilities. Baron's ability was called transformation. Kristen then placed her hand directly on Baron's wound. When she removed her hand, Baron's wound had healed completely, without even a scar. At that moment, Malcolm attacked again. Kristen and Malcolm resumed their fight, but as a human, Malcolm was no match for Kristen. Within 2 moves, Kristen had him by the throat. Garrett then fired another shot at Malcolm. Even when facing Kristen, Garrett still didn't lower his gun. He believed that the presence of werewolves disrupted the ecological balance and posed a threat to humans. But Kristen showed no fear of the silver bullets in Garrett's gun. She used the Luna siblings to persuade Garrett. Kristen knew everything Garrett did was to protect the Luna siblings. Kristen promised she would not harm them and would always protect them because they were her children too. She told Garrett he could always be the father to the Luna siblings if he wished. Hearing this, Garrett softened. Moreover, Harlan was still in police custody, and he needed Kristen's help. So, thanks for tuning in, everyone. If you enjoyed this recap, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more movie summaries and reviews. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell so you never miss an update. Share your thoughts on this movie, or suggest your favorite films for me to cover next in the comments below. I'm Nacho, and I'll catch you in the next one. Until then, keep watching, stay curious, and have a great day.